Okay, I'm gonna shut the door. If you have any concerns, just let me know.
Okay, thank you.
What is your last name and spell it, please?
My last name is Lorentz, spelled Lorentz.
First name and middle initial.
David L.
When were you born, sir?
I was born in 1971
Where were you born?
in St. Louis, Missouri.
And who were your parents and what did they do for a living?
My father was Herbert Lorentz, and he owned several businesses as I was growing up, and he was a truck driver by trade. My mother was Wilma White, and she worked a lot of odd jobs and just really kind of small type jobs, working in grocery stores and stuff like that.
Who were your siblings?
I have 3 older sisters, Sharon, Cindy, and Gay, and then I had 2 older brothers, Herbert Jr. and Mike Lorentz.
Did any of them serve in the military?
Nope, I was the only one in my family who ever served.
How did your parents and your siblings feel about you serving?
Well, I joined the Army, National Guard, but it's the Army. Joined the Army when I was 17 years old, so I had to have at least one parent give me permission, had to sign.
Yeah.
So that happened, but of course they had their concerns about me joining the military. I think any parent that would. My brothers and sisters, they were all older than me, and they were living their lives and stuff, so they didn't really have an opinion. I don't guess if they did, they didn't share it with me. So.
What grade school did you attend?
Doniphan High School. Well, I guess it's Doniphan Grade School too. It's Doniphan, Missouri, is where we went to school.
What high school did you attend then?
Doniphan High School. Yes.
Did you attend college before you went into the military?
I did not attend college before I joined the military. I joined the military when I was in the 11th grade. So right after my 11th grade year, actually. So between my 11th and 12th grade year. And so no college.
So while you were growing up, or like your early years of high school, did you think you would join the military?
You know, I probably started thinking about that most sometime in my junior year. My best friend's dad was a lieutenant colonel in the Army National Guard, and he was, you know, I looked to him as a mentor, and so he had a lot of good advice for me as far as that. And then I ended up working with a gentleman who was in the Guard in Doniphan, and he was telling me about how great it was. And you know, I started thinking I'd kind of like to go to college, and didn't really have a plan on how to pay for that. And I wasn't able to get sports scholarships or anything like that. And I was thinking, well, you know, I'm smart enough to go to college, but I'm not sure how I'm going to pay for it. So it just seemed like a good path for me. And that was probably, you know, like I said, about halfway through my junior year of high school is when I really started putting a lot of thought into it.
Did you like hold any jobs before you went in the military?
Well, I worked in a grocery store as a stocker, and you know, checking people out and that sort of thing. I was a lifeguard at a Boy Scout camp when I was 16 years old. That was it. Those were the only 2 jobs I had. Other than that, just odd jobs, working on the farm, stuff like that.
Where did you live before entering into the military?
Doniphan, Missouri is where I grew up. So that's where I lived before I went in the military.
When you were going into the military, were you drafted or did you enlist?
No, I grew up at a time when the draft was no longer in place. And so it was by the time I joined the military, it was, for the most part, 100% volunteer. You chose to enlist, or you didn't join. So.
Was there a particular reason why you joined besides college?
Pardon me?
Was there a particular reason besides college that made you want to go into the military?
That was the big motivator, was going some avenue to help pay for college, and to have an income while I was in college. So, you know, I mean, it's hard to remember all of the reasons why I joined, but that one's the one that stands out to me as the biggest motivator for joining the military.
What or who did you feel you left behind when you were going in the military?
I didn't really feel like I left anybody or anything behind. I had a girlfriend at the time, and you know, but it didn't feel like I was leaving, you know, anybody behind. Just was looking at it like it was going to be a new experience. Was excited about the opportunity. A little bit scared, but you know, I was looking forward to it. So.
What branch did you enter?
I joined the Army in the National Guard. So basically what that is National Guard is, it's meant for state service, part-time citizen soldiers, if you will. But you're part of the Army, so you can be activated at any given time to be for whatever service is needed, whether it's stateside or federal.
Was there a reason you chose that branch instead of any other one?
There was a local National Guard armory where I lived. It just seemed like the easiest thing to do. I could join that early, you know, between the 11th and 12th grade, and I could be getting paid for going to drills during that time, up to 360 days before going to boot camp. So there was that, and then of course I was thinking to myself, well, if I don't like it, I don't have to do it on a regular, you know, I don't have to do it full time, so I'll only have to do it part time. I was kind of naive in that sense. So.
What type of training or schooling did you have, and where was it?
With the military?
I think more like boot camp and
Okay.
towards that area.
So, I trained right alongside regular Army guys. I mean, we all went to boot camp together. We had, you know, the guys that I was training with were the same guys who were going into regular Army, and they were going to go on to their permanent posts. It was the exact same training.
What do you think is your most vivid memory while you were training?
You know, there was a lot of memories that are very vivid to me about basic training. The most vivid, I would have to say, is the first day that you go there and that you're on a bus. You're scared, you're nervous, you don't really know what to expect, and here come all the drill sergeants, and they're more than happy to help you off the bus. They'll grab your stuff and throw it. I mean, every movie you've ever seen with the drill sergeants yelling at the privates is exactly what happens on the first day that you're there. So that's pretty vivid.
Yeah. What was the best part of your training?
I really liked the physical aspect of training. So I enjoyed that a lot, and you know, just the experience of just every day, day in and day out, physically training and building, you know, your body up, and that was pretty neat. So.
What was the worst part?
Probably the mental aspect of especially the first 8 weeks. The first 8 weeks is pretty intense mentally. So there's a lot of yelling going on, a lot of screaming, a lot of, you know, telling you to do things you don't necessarily want to do, not asking you to do it. It was just, so that was the part that I disliked the most.
About how long was your training and what year did you finish?
So basic training was 8 weeks long, and school was 9 weeks long, and I did those in succession, and so it was 17 weeks of training for me, and I started and ended I started in the summer of '89 and finished up that fall. So.
Does any particular instructor stand out in your mind, and
Yep.
is there a reason?
I have three I had 3 drill sergeants. I probably had more like 4 or 5. But three stand out to me the most, and they were Hugh Wiley and Stephen Archer and John O'Hara. Of course, we didn't call them Hugh, John, and Steve. It was Wiley, Archer, and O'Hara. And you know, they were old, a little bit older than me, so I would have been 18 years old at that time. They were probably 25, and they were big guys, you know, and they're all muscle bound and everything, and you know, just very intimidating. And spent the most time with those three guys, and just had a lot of respect for them, I guess. So.
What was your first assignment after basic training?
So, well, basic training and then schooling's right after that. So, as soon as school was out, as a National Guard, you would typically go home and just do weekend drills, and once a year you do a 2-week annual training. As fate would have it, annual training for me was 2 weeks after I finished my schooling. So 2 weeks after finishing training, I went to Panama City, Panama, and that was pretty interesting. I was on an Army post and all that, so you know, I mean, it wasn't a typical National Guardsman's first month after, you know, graduating, but that's where I went.
It is said that in basic training, the individual is broken and the serviceman is created. Would you agree with this statement?
I would probably rephrase that. I wouldn't use that terminology. I think they strip you down to your core, and then once they've got you stripped down and you no longer feel like you're an individual, they build you back up as a unit, you know. And to me, to say that they break, the guys who break, they don't get built back up. They get sent home. So I wouldn't say that they break a soldier down. I mean, we're just playing with words here. Strip them down to the point to see what they can handle, and then from that point they build them back up as a unit. So to some degree, I agree with that. I just don't think I'd use that language.
Did you receive any special training, anything like specialized training, and what was it?
Well, every soldier at that point is trained in with a rifle, hand grenades, which, you know, that's a little scary, throwing things that explode around. And then as an MP, I was also qualified with a sidearm pistol, and every soldier gets trained on a buffer. So once you leave basic training in AIT, you're qualified to run a mop and a buffer. So yeah, that's about the most specialized training I got in basic training and advanced training. From there, you know, you learn other things, but not at that point.
Were those all the equipment that you were able to use?
We also, you know, in school we learned how to use military vehicles, and that was used in our day-to-day job. So we learned how to drive the different vehicles that we would have needed at that time.
What was it like training with certain pieces of equipment?
So the hand grenades were the scariest because you really didn't know how well somebody could do with that. But as far as, you know, the sidearms and the rifles, you know, I grew up on a farm. I grew up hunting, so shooting guns and shooting weapons, it didn't bother me. There was nothing too terribly new about that.
Yeah. What was the hardest part of training?
Again, just the mental aspect of it. You know, the day in and day out, we marched a lot. I mean, a lot. We marched everywhere we went. And, you know, July sun in Alabama, it doesn't get much hotter than that. So it's pretty difficult in that sense.
Did you receive any promotions, and could you tell us about them?
Sure, sure. So, you know, the first 4 promotions that any soldier receives is kind of just, I mean, you'd have to be a complete dunderhead to not get promoted to E4. So I made those 4 promotions pretty easily. You don't receive any promotions until you've completed basic training. So I was already in for a year and a half before I received my first promotion. And that's just kind of the way, because of the way I joined. So I might have been the longest or the oldest E1 there was, or the longest E1 to be in the National Guard. I was there for a year and a half before I ever made it to E2. But then E3 and E4, you know, they're just based on time of service. So
Where were you sent after basic training for advanced training?
I was what you call OSIT, one station unit training. So my school was right there in the same place. Never even changed bunks. I was in the same bunk from basic training all the way through school.
Do you agree that you were put in the right position when you were sent for advanced training?
Looking back, it probably wasn't the job that suited me most. I had plenty of opportunities to, my MOS, if you will, was military police, and there were things about it that I liked. I had plenty of opportunities to become a police officer or a corrections officer after I got out of the military. It just wasn't something I was interested in.
Do you remember any specific skill that you were taught?
Well, we did a lot of, you know, as far as job skills. I mean, we learned hand-to-hand combat. We learned how to, you know, I mean, just the daily duties of what a police officer would do is a lot of the things that I was taught. I learned, my unit actually specialized in enemy prisoners of war, so it was a lot really geared towards corrections along those same lines. It's just standing guard over people who you're holding and how to process them in a safe manner.
What was your job when you began military service?
So, like I just said, military police, and but there's different things that military police perform. They may work garrison duty, which would be similar to what you would see as a civilian police officer, riding around in a car, giving out tickets, that sort of stuff. And then there was enemy prisoner of war, or POW guards, and that's kind of the area that I was more specialized in.
Where did you begin military service after advanced training?
So we kind of talked a little bit about this. As a National Guardsman, I would have normally just went home, and once a month I would have went out on drill, and I would have, you know, we would have had classes and we would have practiced different functions, riot control, the sort of things that maybe a state military member might get activated for. But since it's just the way it fell, I ended up in Panama City, Panama, just 2 weeks out of training. And half of my unit went down with me, or I went down with half of my unit, and we came home and the other rotation came down, and it just so happened that about halfway through their rotation, the United States Army decided to oust Noriega. So my unit got activated in Panama City, and they built a POW camp in Panama City. A lot of the guys I went to school with were there for that, and it was a big deal because the National Guard had not been activated in many, many years, and it was it made major news. Half of my unit they were forced to stay in Panama for, I think, about a month, so it was a pretty exciting time.
From the time in your service, can you give me 4 or 5 things that you remember today?
Oh, well, you know, there's a lot of things that I learned while I was in the military that I have used in my day-to-day happenings. You know, I wake up early. I still try to stay physically active. I try to take care of myself physically. And I try to plan my day out early so that I can prepare for whatever might come. But as far as 4 or 5 things that I remember, I was in Panama City, and that was like the first time the National Guard had been activated. I wasn't there during that time. There was a lot of turmoil in the city at that time. There's a lot of angst, and Noriega's a dictator, and there's a lot of back and forth between the United States and Noriega. So there was a lot of turmoil, and then aside from that, then going to Saudi Arabia the following year, and that was a big deal. So.
Can you describe what it looked like over in Saudi Arabia?
Sure. When we finally got to our permanent place in Saudi Arabia, it's a little town called Afar al-Batin. We were probably 5 to 10 miles outside of the city. It wasn't a city, it was a town. I don't even know how big it was, but it was just a little bitty town. And we were 5 to 10 miles out from there. We were just out in the desert. There was nothing there. And we set up our camp out in the middle of nowhere and started building the POW camp. The engineers came in, and bulldozers came in, and they built a camp right out in the middle of the desert, and it was just sand. There was nothing there.
Was there any religion that you remember specifically that the people
Sure.
had there?
In Saudi Arabia, there was primarily they're Muslim. I don't know if there's any other religion there other than Muslim. There's 2 different sects of Muslims. I don't know that much about which one they were. It was either Sunni or Shia, but that's what they practiced there.
Were there any people there that made impressions of you, like soldiers or?
Well, I've got several friends there, that I went there with. Some of those guys I went to school with. The guy who was in the bunk 4 feet away from me, I'd known since I was in 3rd grade. So, I've got a lot of people there that, it felt like family to some degree. But I wouldn't say there was anybody there who made an impression on me as far as meeting one of the local people or anything like that.
Were there any dramatic lifestyle changes that you had to adapt to once you went there?
Well, we were separated from the folks there. We were allowed to practice our own, what we wanted to in our own camp. When we'd go into town, you really were trying to adapt to their culture so that you would not be, so you wouldn't do anything that would be offensive to them or anything like that. But you just tried to blend in as best you could, and it was difficult because everybody knew who you were and why you were there.
What were the conditions like where you served? Would you say they would be considered dangerous or anything?
Dangerous serving in that area?
Yeah.
We were in danger there. We were 40 miles from the front lines. We had Scud, once the war started, there were Scud missiles being launched into our area, but they really had no way of controlling those, I don't believe. The conditions were dangerous, could have been dangerous at times. Once the war started, it was you just really didn't know what was going to happen, so it was just on edge for the most part.
Was there anything that really affected you guys, like heat or weather or anything?
There were sandstorms, there was heat in the summer. We were out in the desert. The one thing that I wasn't aware of was that it also gets very cold in the desert. We were there between December and April, and we'd wake up in the mornings and there'd be ice on the tents, and you really couldn't get warm enough. And we did not have the gear that we needed to stay warm. I didn't think anyway. I felt like I was freezing my tail off. So.
Were you in combat support, or combat service support role?
my role would have been a combat service support role.
And would you say the war zone made that designation relevant?
Not really, not in this particular instance, because once the war was initiated, the lines continued to move away from us. You know, if there had been any resistance where they were moving towards us or anything like that, it could have been, but not in this particular instance, no.
How do you think your combat time experience changed you?
It's hard to say, because, you know, when I came home, I did not feel like I was any different than I was the day I went. People around me would tell me that I was different, that I acted different, that I thought I was different, that they thought I was different. But I don't know. And, you know, it's a hard question to answer, really.
What kinds of friendships and camaraderie did you form while serving, and who were those people?
Okay, so, you know, obviously, like I said, I went over there with a lot of guys that I've known my entire life, and some of those are lasting friendships today. I still see some of those guys on a regular basis.
How did you stay in touch with your family and friends during this time?
While we were there, we wrote letters primarily. There was no internet, so we couldn't Facebook or FaceTime with them or anything like that. We did have phone banks. After we'd been there for a while, we were able to call home.
Did you find it difficult to stay in touch with them?
There was only a few people that I was actually talking to. I mean, writing letters was easy. He had lots of time to do that, so he'd write letters.
Was there anyone in particular that impacted you with getting ready for going to this major zone?
Well, you know, I mean, it was a time in my life that I did not join the military to go to a war. I knew that it was I knew that it was a possibility, but I didn't really think about it. I didn't think about that being it. So when this all happened, of course, I was a little scared. I was a little concerned. So I went and I did talk to my uncle. His name was Alfred, and he was in the Korean War, had engaged heavily in combat, and had had to do things that soldiers do. So I talked to him a lot about what I might expect and how I might respond to that. And his words were comforting, but you know, there was always that question in my mind: how am I going to react if I have to, you know, shoot somebody, you know, or something like that.
What did you do for recreation when you were off of duty?
Like I said, we read a lot of books and wrote letters. We did have an opportunity to play a lot of sand volleyball, so had an awesome sand pit until somebody ran over our ball, and that was the end of the volleyball. So.
Do you recall any particularly humorous or unusual events?
About not necessarily about being in Saudi Arabia. I don't remember anything that was very overwhelmingly funny about that experience. But one time when I was I got activated for state duty in '93 when the Mississippi and Missouri rivers flooded, and I was standing out on patrol with a guy. His name was Dennis, and I don't know what his last name was, but he was a St. Charles deputy sheriff, and he looked at my name tag and he said, "Lorentz." I said, "Yeah." He says, "Where are you from?" I said, "Well, I live in Springfield." And he didn't really say anything else. That was about 9 o'clock in the morning. And then later on in the day, and I'm standing there with another guy who I've known my entire life, we get to talking about Donovan. And he goes, "I thought you," Dennis, the deputy sheriff, goes, "I thought you said you were from Springfield." I said, "Well, I am from Springfield. I live in Springfield now, but I grew up in Donovan." And he goes, "Is your dad's name Herbert?" I said, "Yeah." He says, "Is your mom's name Wilma?" I said, "Yeah." And he goes, "I used to live in your parents' basement when they lived in St. Louis." And he goes, "I haven't seen you since you were in diapers." I said, "I don't remember you." So, you know, that was it's just kind of, it's a small world. you know.
Was there something you did for good luck?
Not really. I can't say there was anything. I'm not a superstitious guy, so.
What would you say was probably the best part of your service experience?
Probably making lifelong friendships with guys and really learning some philosophies and principles that I live by today. So
What was the hardest part of the military lifestyle?
the hardest thing for me was just adapting to a lifestyle. I'm a self-motivated guy. You know, I've started my own business from the ground up. It was very difficult for me to do the whole hurry up and wait thing in the military. I didn't really feel like I needed someone to tell me when to wake up, what to do next, or, you know, and I didn't like standing around in line. So for me, that was the hardest part, and that's probably the reason why I decided I didn't want to continue a military service.
Was there an easiest part for you?
Oh, I don't know. It's just I wouldn't say there was an easiest part to the military. It was just something that I did. I was glad to have the experience, but I was ready to move on by the time it came time for me to re-up.
How long did you serve in the military?
My total term was 8 years. There's 6 years active, and then there was 2 years in active ready reserve. So that was a period of time where they could have called me back if they wanted to activate me, but that didn't happen. So 6 years commitment was the main portion.
Do you recall the day your service ended?
Not really. I just showed up and turned all my gear in and handed all my uniforms back over and said, see ya. There was no cake and ice cream or anything like that. And I got my discharge papers in the mail a month or two later.
Was there a particular reason why you left?
I just felt like it was time to move on. To make it a career would have been, you know, 24 years more is what it would have taken, and that seemed like an awful long time. And it just felt like everything that I had needed from the military I had already received.
Did you return home afterwards?
No, because home was, to me at that point, I didn't know where home was anymore. I was living in Tulsa, Oklahoma at that time, so it wasn't home for me. Home was where I was at. So,
How would you say you were received by your family and community after you returned?
well, when we came home from Saudi Arabia, you know, we returned to a hero's welcome. They loaded us up on a truck and drove us down the middle of town, and you know, they had little kindergartners out there singing a song and all this stuff, and that was cool. I saw a lot of friends that I hadn't seen in a couple of years and all that, but. You know, as far as getting out of the military and all of that, I don't remember anybody really it being an event at all. So.
How did you readjust to your civilian life?
So, you know, I mean, for me, readjusting to civilian life would have been kind of like leaving, coming home from Saudi Arabia, and it was a little different for me, but it was, you know, I mean, I had plans of going back to college by the time I got home. So I got home in April, at the end of April, and I knew college was starting in the fall, and I was like, well, I'm just going to take a vacation. So I went to Florida for a month, you know.
So when you got back, did you choose to work or did you choose to continue school?
Right. I didn't start a job when I first got back. I went on vacation and came back and went to college. So.
Did the GI Bill support your education?
It helped, but it wasn't. I was on the Montgomery GI Bill, so it wasn't. It was not great. They would only repay student loans that you had in place already. I had 3 years in service before I ever had my first annual. They only pay on the anniversary of a year of the loan. So I was in the military for 3 years before they ever made a single payment on my GI or on my student loans.
Did you continue any friendships after service?
Still have a lot of friends that I went to Saudi Arabia with, and friends that I was in the military with. Yeah.
Would you say that it affected the way you relate to others?
I'm sure it did. I really kind of tried to focus me and make me a more principled person. I would have to say when I came home though, I was probably pretty reckless. Attitude was probably out there a little bit, and just a weird, I don't know how to describe it. It's unique and unusual, but it was, that's all in the past now, so it's kind of like I can reflect on that and just say, it was kind of a troubling time in my life.
Did you join a veteran organization?
I joined the VFW a few years ago. I'm a lifetime member, paid my dues for that, but I don't actively participate.
Do you attend any reunions ever?
I have not yet. I mean, the first reunions that my unit has had was probably been in the last 2 or 3 years. We've celebrated the 25th reunion of that. It would have been 2017, 25 years, so.
Would you say that those skills that you had learned are still present today in your life?
Most of those, I would say I've probably, a lot of the day-to-day skills of getting up, getting prepared for your day, staying physically fit, doing those things are always present in my life today. And as far as the job skills that I learned, no, probably not.
What are some life lessons you'd say you learned from your service?
The world's a bigger place than what you may be used to, and you got to get out there and see it. You got to try to keep an open mind about different cultures and different things. There's a bigger world out there than what you may have been exposed to.
How has your military service impacted your feelings about war and the military in general?
So, I've done a lot of world traveling in the last 10 years, and I've had an opportunity to go on some mission trips and help build homes for victims of AIDS and low-income families in different parts of the world. And I've tried to compare my experiences doing that to my experiences of going to another country and trying to force democracy on them. And it doesn't feel like when you go to a country and I'm going to use the word invade, it may not necessarily be the right word, but when you go to a country to overthrow a dictator or something like that, and then you want to just hand it all over to the folks and say, here you go, it's yours, now you're free. It doesn't feel like we're getting really the good results of doing that we're hoping to. So, I think that war should probably be the last resort in most instances, so.
What message would you like to leave for future generations who would ever see this video?
Again, the world's a big place, and there's almost always more than one way to solve a problem. If the only tool in your toolbox is a hammer, everything's going to look like a nail, and you're just going to want to hit it. So, you can't force democracy on people. If people aren't ready for their own renaissance, you can't force freedom on people. You've got to be willing to let them fight some of their own battles. And I don't want my country to be seen as an imperialist country who's going out here and fighting everybody else's wars. I don't want to be sending our guys, our veterans, our guys who are going to be veterans for the next generation. I don't want to be sending our folks out there to fight wars for other countries if they're not going to grab on to freedom and fight for it. So,
to conclude this interview, we have one more question for you. What do you wish people knew more about veterans?
So, you know, I mean, as far as veterans are concerned, you know, when a person joins the military, they join the military for their own reasons. And they may not be my reasons, they may join for other reasons. They may see it as a lifestyle, that's what they want, and that everybody comes to that decision on their own accord. But, you know, once they join, and you know, they sacrifice a lot for this country. Less than 10% of the population is considered a veteran, and fewer, and only about half of them are combat veterans. So, you know, before we send our men and women to war, we need to realize the costs, the true cost of that. They're going to come home and they're going to have mental and physical scars. They're going to be broken. Some of them are going to be broken mentally. Some of them are going to be broken physically. They're going to lose limbs, you know, and we need the people to realize that if that's what we're going to do, then we have an obligation to take care of those men and women. So,
Thank you very much for sharing your story
You're
with
welcome.
us.
And Mr. Emil, we're finished.
We all good? Excellent. Well, you're still alive, that's a good sign.
yeah.
Are they as tough